Live from New York City and across the country, this is ABC News Election Night 2018.
World News anchor David Muir here with that.
George, we heard it so often from the president in these final weeks. He said, pretend I'm on the ballot, and people didn't have to pretend. They went to the ballot today and they voted on whether or not they approve of Donald Trump. Take a look at the numbers that are coming in. These are preliminary exit polls, early in the night here, of course, but 44% of voters who turned out at the polls today said they approve of President Trump's job performance. 55% say they disapprove. But on that crucial question of whether or not they voted today because of President Trump, with the president in mind, 26% said they voted to support the president. But look at this, 38% said they opposed President Trump. About a third there said the president is not a factor, but nearly two-thirds of the country heading to the polls today with President Trump in mind.
On their mind. We are back here at ABC News Election Headquarters here in New York. World News anchor David Muir here with that. Let's talk about the issues that were top of mind.
Yeah, we heard so much from President Trump about caravan, Kavanaugh, law and order, as Cecilia pointed out at the top of the broadcast here. But when you dive into the issues, this is what voters said when they left the polls today. Most important issue facing the country. And look at this. By a large margin, 41% saying health care is the most important issue. 23% far behind that, immigration, which has been Donald Trump's #1 topic in the final weeks of the campaign. 21% of the economy. Obviously, the president was hoping, the White House was hoping the economy would loom larger with those job numbers last Friday. But healthcare issue #1, and what a drastic change from midterms past, where healthcare could perhaps buoy some of these Democrats in races tonight, given the fact that it's now important, and many Americans believe that perhaps the Democrats have made the better argument that they'll save pre-existing conditions.
Healthcare usually works against the left. Yeah. What did the exit polls show about that?
This is really interesting. When you look at this, 53% of the voters there approve of Donald Trump. But to get to the Kavanaugh point that John brings up, voting against Brett Kavanaugh, 10% said it was the most important factor, but another 40% said it was important. Half of the voters in Indiana said his vote against Brett Kavanaugh was important. But you have to think, Joe Donnelly, his final ad was him splitting wood, trying to point out to voters in Indiana how often he split with his own party, George, to support President Trump on the border wall, on defense spending, traveling across the state in his RV and his flannel. But it was not enough to convince those Trump voters in Indiana that he was their guy.
Make it Blackburn there. What do you see in the exit polls in Tennessee?
It's so interesting. Phil Bredesen did so many things that you'd think he'd have to do to try to win in Tennessee. He said that Donald Trump was an experienced negotiator. He supported Brett Kavanaugh. He said he was disgusted in both parties by what he saw play out on Capitol Hill. But look in Tennessee, this is what he was up against. He was up against a state where so many people like what they're seeing from President Trump. 57% of the voters in Tennessee approve of the job performance. Was he a factor in your vote? Yep. Look at this. 38% said they support Trump. 26% said they oppose him. You break it down by issues in Tennessee, and by far the #1 issue, 38% healthcare. He tried to push protecting pre-existing conditions that didn't necessarily work for him. But look at this. This is the most telling number out of the exit poll so far in Tennessee. They actually like Bredesen. They like Phil Bredesen. The problem is, George, they like Donald Trump more.
That's true. David Muir?
Yeah, take a look at what we're seeing from the exit polls on Joe Manchin. People still like him in West Virginia. That's the thing. He's been around for a long time. 51% of the voters who turned out today say they have a favorable opinion of Joe Manchin in these final days. He was on his motorcycle crisscrossing the state. He'd actually said that he regretted supporting Hillary Clinton, said he might be open to supporting Donald Trump in 2020 if he agrees with him on a number of issues. And as we know, he famously went against Brett Kavanaugh at the last minute after that Susan Collins speech. He didn't want to be the tipping point on Brett Kavanaugh, but he did come out against Kavanaugh, and it likely helped him in the end here. I'll tell you one thing Rick Scott is going to like in these early exit polls, as this is a nail-biter in Florida, it always is. But look at the demographics. When you break it down, Donald Trump approval. This is a state that he won by a little more than 1% over Hillary Clinton just 2 years ago. 51% of the voters who turned out in Florida today said they like the job that President Trump is doing. When asked if he was a factor in the vote, this one is kind of interesting to reconcile to what I just showed you. But 22% they said they turned out to support Trump. 33% said they turned out to oppose. But look at that. 43% fully said Trump not a factor. You break down by issues. Let's look at what's important to Florida voters. Healthcare by far issue #1. We're seeing this over and over again in so many of these important states. And when you break it down from healthcare to pre-existing conditions, which is what Democrats in these final weeks tried to make these campaigns about, 48% say the Democratic Party. But there are some good signs in there for Rick Scott and for people who were concerned about Donald Trump being attached to them. Cecilia said Rick Scott tried to separate himself, at least when it came to the hurricane and a few other issues. But by and large, Florida voters today said they approve of what they're seeing from Donald Trump.
And Mary,
know, I think the most important thing to look at Florida is Donald Trump's approval rating. He won by 100,000 votes, as we know, so close, a little more than 1% 2 years ago. 51%, more than half of the voters who turned out in Florida say they approve of President Trump's job performance. But Rick Scott, as you know, was an early supporter of Donald Trump, and I was down there after the hurricane, and he took a break from campaigning, and he did not want to talk about the campaign. He wanted to make it clear that it was about the response, and Cecilia alluded to this earlier. They're concerned on both sides of this about the displaced Puerto Rican, the American citizens from Puerto Rico who were there after that Hurricane Maria, and of course the hurricanes this year. Rick Scott's been very careful about distancing himself from the president in moments when he needs to, but then embracing the president in other moments. And I've got to say, they've got to be happy within the Scott camp when they look at these approval ratings. Donald Trump is still very well liked in a state that he's adopted as his home state.
We're hearing from the White House right now. Sarah David Muir, let's talk a little bit more about the exit polls. You see some dramatic swings among groups of voters.
Yeah, these are the groups that we really keep a close eye on, George. As you know, the independents often called swing voters, and look at what they've done just in a matter of 2 years. They backed Donald Trump by 6 points 2 years ago, independents, but let's break it down tonight. Preliminary results coming in right now, but look at how they're voting. 54% of independents in this country are voting for Democratic candidates, 41% for Republicans. And when you break down moderates in this country, moderate voters, Hillary Clinton won moderates by 13 points, but look at this. Democrats are now winning moderates in the midterm by a 29-point margin over Donald Trump, 62% to 35%. They're called swing voters for a reason, and look at what we're seeing tonight.
Yeah, Matthew Dowd, those Republican.
These are our exit polls tonight, preliminary results. Control the House. 53% of voters who turned out today, look at this, want the Democratic Party to control the House, perhaps as a check on President Trump, because Republicans obviously control everything right now. 43% want it to stick with the Republican Party. When you break it down, men and women heading out to the polls today, 48% of men want the Democrats to control the House. 57% of women, you can see the gap right there. And you were talking about this earlier. As the economy goes, sometimes so goes the House, George, as you pointed out. People do believe the economy is good shape. 67% say excellent or good shape. But look at this. When you break it down, have you felt the effects of this improving economy? Far right of your screen there, 49%, about half of the voters turning out today say they feel exactly the same as they did a couple of years ago.
You know, let me
Burke lost. He probably can be pretty proud of some of the voters he did get to come out to the polls. They set some records here for a midterm. 24% of the voters in Texas were Hispanic or Latino, 59% white. The issues in Texas driving this race, 38% said health care. That's not as far ahead as we've seen in some of the other states. 32% said immigration. That was, as you know, a big issue for Ted Cruz, pointing to the border wall, saying we must support this president. Beto O'Rourke saying we need more sensible immigration reform. 21% there say the economy. And when you break this down, was Donald Trump a factor in your vote in Texas? Take a look at this. 22% said they supported, 28% said they opposed, but nearly half of the voters in Texas say Donald Trump was not a factor. Ted Cruz pulling it out.
Ted Cruz.
This is an ABC News election update. Now reporting, George Stephanopoulos.
And what we're reporting right now is that Republicans will keep the Senate. ABC News can project that Republicans will keep control of the Senate.
In Heidi Heitkamp's face when she made that decision in her interviews right afterward. But take a look. The exit poll shows us very clearly Heidi Heitkamp's vote against Kavanaugh. 8% said it was the most important factor, but more telling is that second number right there. 34% say it was an important factor in their vote. Look at this. When you take a look at when did North Dakotans decide who they were going to vote for, it wasn't the last few days, wasn't even last week. They'd made this decision sometime before. But remember what Heidi Heitkamp said. She said, do I want to continue to do work? Absolutely. But do I want to sacrifice my conscience? Do I want to sacrifice the Supreme Court? She said no. She took a stand on Kavanaugh. She voted for Neil Gorsuch. She said yes. But to Brett Kavanaugh, she said no. And you knew almost immediately that she knew what this would mean for her. Florida had a lot of airtime in these last couple of months. You got to think about a couple of things here. Unemployment in Florida, 3.5%. That's lower than the national average right now, 3.7%. He said Obamacare is a job killer. He made this argument that we've heard from so many Republicans in this cycle that they are the ones who will save pre-existing conditions. If he wins tonight, he will have been successful in making that argument. And when you look at Florida, Donald Trump's approval rating in Florida, we keep coming back to this number. Let's just see if it's been refreshed tonight. 51% of the voters who turned out in Florida. Remember, he won this by just 1%, about 100,000 votes over Hillary Clinton, but more than half of the voters in Florida like what they're seeing from Donald Trump. And Rick Scott's been careful about embracing President Trump. But one thing he did do on his own was to take 8 trips to Puerto Rico. President Trump was highly criticized for his response to Maria. Rick Scott was very careful. He knew that a lot of the displaced American citizens from Puerto Rico would play a role in this election, and he was careful to show them that he cares, too, about Puerto Rico. Claire McCaskill even said, I've sided with Donald Trump on 48% of the things he's offered his opinion on. I mean, this is the kind of language that she was using in the end. In the very end of this race, she literally at town halls was asking people to stand up if they have a pre-existing condition or if they have a loved one with a pre-existing condition, to drive home the point that her opponent was one of these who signed on to this lawsuit against Obamacare. But Josh Hawley did something very smart of his own with his ad about his 5-year-old son, who they said they learned not long ago had a pre-existing condition and that he would fight to save them. But look at some of the exits coming in from Missouri. This is what Claire McCaskill's really up against. President Trump's job performance, half of the state very happy with what they're seeing so far. When you look at the issues in Missouri, healthcare is issue number 1. I'm going to break it down for you. Pre-existing conditions. Look at this. They even believe in that state that the Democratic Party would do a better job with pre-existing conditions, but this is a state where Trump won by 18 points. That's what Claire McCaskill's up against. And one last thing I want to show you. When it comes to the Brett Kavanaugh vote, she voted against Brett Kavanaugh. 40% said it was an important factor. But again, George, this is a red state where a Democratic senator is trying to hold on, paying a price for the Kavanaugh vote, because when you broaden out, look at the national perspective, only 43% of voters who turned out today support Brett Kavanaugh, 48% oppose. It's really in these red states.
Projected a split decision in the midterm elections tonight. Democrats will take control of the House of Representatives tonight, projected to get more than the 23 seats they need. So far, 16. They're on their way to getting the majority, but Republicans will hold control of the Senate, have already picked up 2 seats, many seats left to play, and playing with toy blocks, building Trump's wall.
Said he would build Trump's wall. I mean, he was very, very supported by Donald Trump. He felt that, and he made it very clear that he would side with Donald Trump on all of the key issues that Donald Trump has put forward, in particular the wall, building the blocks early on with his son. And again, we go back to the Florida governor's race, and we look at what the exit polls are showing us tonight. This is a state that helped give Donald Trump the victory 2 years ago, 100,000 votes. And the people in Florida approve of what they're seeing from Donald Trump so far. The issues, when you break it down to the issues, 40% said health care was issue number 1. We knew that Andrew Gillum talked about universal health care. He talked about fighting to save pre-existing conditions. It wasn't enough to allay those who made health care number 1. They went with Ron DeSantis, obviously. You take a look at Ron DeSantis and his positions. 6% believe that he was too liberal, which is not really, doesn't really pertain to his. 34% said too conservative. 48%, though, said he was about right. But Andrew Gillum, the son of a school bus driver, construction worker, the fact that he would come this close with a progressive agenda in Florida says something about what the race he just ran. Say, look what we just picked up in the Senate. And George, I just want to show you this in the exit poll. If we're feeling tonight that what's reflected by the voters of the polls today, Republican pickups in the Senate, mostly in Donald Trump states where he won handily in red territory already, and then you see the pickup in the House for the Democrats. This question, are Americans becoming more united, more divided, about the same? And overwhelmingly, voters, 77% say this country is becoming more divided.
The question is who can bridge that?
Out exactly what Governor Christie has just said, in particular when it comes to the Flint water crisis. I mean, what Gretchen Whitmer did was she went after working class voters. This was a state that Trump won by 10,000 votes 2 years ago. And take a look at the exit polls. I'm just going to laser in on how they handled the Flint water crisis and who would be better to handle towns having safe drinking water. 42% said only Gretchen Whitmer. She had some very, very basic arguments to make. She said, I'm going to handle the Flint water crisis. She said, fix the damn roads was one of her key slogans. And she won. She won handily in a state after Florida and Ohio that the Democrats sorely needed a governorship somewhere tonight. Yeah, and they're kind of telling you this is the flip side of what you just showed up there with Joe Donnelly, Heidi Heitkamp, Claire McCaskill, all these Democratic senators trying to hold on in states that Trump easily won. Nevada was the one state where Hillary won by 2. Dean Heller trying to hold on to his seat. And we don't have numbers from it yet, but take a look at what the exit polls are showing us. When asked on Donald Trump approval, we know this is a referendum on the president tonight. 47% in Nevada approve of his job performance. More than half of the voters who turned out today said they disapprove. That might be encouraging for Jackie Rosen's camp. Was Donald Trump a factor in your vote today? 40% said they showed up to oppose, 33% to support him. When it comes to gun control, and obviously we were talking about this earlier with Cecilia and everybody else here, what we've seen in America in this last year, we cannot forget Las Vegas and the massacre, the largest massacre in history. 52% there support stricter gun control measures, which is something that Jackie Rosen has talked about often on the campaign trail. But she's really most often talked about protecting pre-existing conditions, saying that we do not need to repeal and replace Obamacare. Why not fix it? That has been central to her campaign ads and to her on the stump, repeatedly saying the answer is to fix this, to protect pre-existing conditions, not to throw it out. Or not you believe more women should be elected. What the voters in Georgia said. Look at this. 45% say it's very important that more women be elected. 27% also said it was somewhat important. You break it down by approval. We've been talking about the referendum and the president all night long. More than half of the voters in Georgia approve of what they're seeing from Donald Trump. And we know she's a very progressive candidate. She disagrees on Donald Trump on just about every issue. Was Donald Trump a factor in your vote? 21% said they support him. Just 14% they said they showed up to show their opposition to Donald Trump. When you break it down by the issues in Georgia, much more evenly divided than what we've seen in many of the other states. 33% said health care. That was a major issue for her. 33% immigration. Obviously, President Trump's argument in the final weeks, immigration in this country. You break it down one last, I'll show you, pre-existing conditions, 52%. That's the one area in all of these issues where Georgia voters said the Democratic Party definitely has the edge, and that was something she pushed very hard in these final weeks. Yeah, almost immediately. I've talked to a couple of people just leading up to election night just to get sort of the temperature within the party. One of the people I talked to was Senator Kamala Harris, and she talked about this issue of progressives in the South running in several of these races, and the working class that we saw Governor-elect Whitmer claim in Michigan tonight. And what she said to me was, she said she doesn't mind that her name comes up on these lists anymore. It doesn't distract her. She said she's not even close to even answering a question about it. But she did say it's a false choice in America to decide that you have to either run as a progressive or run as say, Joe Donnelly did in Indiana, that there is a way to talk to working class America with the same argument made all over the country. Then I had Governor Kasich in the office this week. He was coming through ABC, and he's no longer going to be the governor. He's out now, term limits. But one of the things he said was he admitted he talked to Joe Biden not long ago, Vice President Joe Biden. He would love the idea, and I think this is sort of a pipe dream at this moment in time, of a third ticket where a Republican and a Democrat would join together.
Yeah, he talked about that with John Hickenlooper. You've been looking at the exit polls all night.
Really interesting. You think about the jobs report just last Friday, 250,000 jobs, unemployment at 3.7%. A pretty strong economy, and look at this number tonight. Direction of the country, 54% of voters said wrong track, and I was struck by the conversation moments ago. Nobody had an answer for the Democrats for 2020, and you cannot argue what Mary Bruce brought up, that tweet from the president, the magic that he speaks of, Joe Donnelly, Claire McCaskill, John Tester in the fight of his life. Everywhere Donald Trump went, just about every place he landed that plane, he had impact.
ABCnews.com will stay on right now, and I'll see you tomorrow.